on guys, Alex here with TFL Bike, and I am so excited for this video because this is a comparison I've been wanting to do since we started TFL Bike. Yamaha MT-09 versus Kawasaki Z900. This is my personal motorcycle right here. This is a direct competitor to the MT-09. And yeah, I've obviously had a lot of seat time on this Yamaha right here. I've had a decent amount of seat time now on the Z900, but I've never ridden them back to back. So that's what we're doing in this video. We're gonna go through all the differences, take them out on the road, see what the differences are, see how they ride differently, and figure out which is the better bike for you. Now, this is my personal MT-09, which means it's not the newest, latest, and greatest model. This is a 2019, so it's the second generation MT-09. The new one, you're gonna get a 6-axis IMU, a lot more technology. They revised some of the steering geometry, but I did do a full review on that MT-09, and I can tell you, even though it's better in just about every way, it's still pretty darn similar to the older model I have here. So when we're talking about comparing how these two ride, yes, there are some differences between the new MT-09 and this one that we're looking at here, but it's pretty much the same thing. They're gonna ride basically the same way. Now, I've done a full review on both the Z900 and the MT-09, so if you want to deep dive on all the specs, every piece of information, go check out the full reviews of each of these bikes. That'll be linked down in the description below. But really, there's three main differences between the Z900 and the MT-09, and we're going to go through all of those in this video. And the first one I want to start out with is the riding position. I've said this every single time I get on a Z900. I love the way this bike feels when you throw a leg over it. It's got a really unique feeling that you don't get on a lot of other bikes, where you feel like you're sitting inside of the bike. The seat is low, the tank comes up high, and you kind of reach over the tank to get to the bars, and it really just gives you this connected feeling that you're sitting inside the bike. Also, I think it's a little more aggressive than the MT-09 in terms of where my feet are positioned. They're a little up higher and a little kicked further back. So you do kind of lean forward on this Z900 more than MT-09, even though they're both naked bikes. But I really love the riding position on the Z900, more so than the MT-09. Let's go see what that looks like. All right, so stepping onto the MT-09 now. Yeah, I feel like the tank is way lower down. The seat, not really higher per se, it just feels higher. It might be slightly higher off the ground, but both bikes, really easy to get my feet down on the ground. Taking a look at how my feet are positioned, much lower on my feet here on the MT. A little bit of a less aggressive angle. So yeah, this bike's gonna be a little more comfortable on those longer highway rides. So if that's something you do a lot, you might wanna look at the MT-09. But I definitely prefer the riding position of the Z900. And like I said before, the new MT-09, pretty much an identical riding position to this bike. Slightly tweaked, but nowhere close to as different as the Z900. All right, so powering the Z900, you have an inline-4. It's a 948cc inline-4 engine, so this does have the MT-09 beat on displacement. The new MT-09 is closer to a true 900. The one I have is an 847, but even still, the Z900 on both the old MT-09 and the new MT-09 has it beat in terms of displacement. Power, we're looking at 113 horsepower and 74 foot-pounds of torque. Horsepower is pretty much neck and neck between these two bikes. Torque, the Kawasaki does have the Yamaha beat out a little bit. You're looking at 73 foot-pounds of torque compared to 65 foot-pounds of torque on the MT-09. All right, and then the MT-09 is powered by Yamaha's CP3. It's an inline 3-cylinder with their cross-plane crank. 847cc in this one, but like I said, the newer model, you're gonna get an 890cc engine. Kawasaki still has it beat in terms of displacement. 114 horsepower, so one more horsepower than the Z900, and 64 foot-pounds of torque. So you do have a little more torque on the Z900, but numbers don't tell the whole story here. These bikes ride pretty differently, and I think the only way to really show that is to get them out on the road, back to back, hop on one, hop on the other, and talk about the differences. All right, time to get these two bikes out on the road, and we're gonna start with the Z900 because I have less seat time on that. So let's get the key turned here. Hell yeah. And I'm gonna go straight to sport mode because that's where I like to be. Oh God, I love how high up my feet come on this bike. It feels so good. Off we go. We have a nasty, nasty snowstorm about to roll in here, as you can tell by looking at the clouds over the mountains back there. So I am super, super stoked that I get to get out and have a little bit of fun today before we're snowed in for a couple days. Riding in Colorado is pretty great because you still get to enjoy seasons here. If you're into winter sports like skiing and snowboarding, you still get to do all of that. But like the high today was 53 degrees, so you know, still in December and January you can find some good days to ride. Also, 3 cars ahead of me right now is a snowplow truck that's spraying some sort of brine or whatever they use down on the road, and I have no idea actually what substance that is that they spray onto the road here. Hopefully it's not too slippery, so I'm trying to kind of stay in between where he's spraying it, and I'm gonna go a different way than him so that I don't crash this bike. I don't know, it could not be slippery at all, but I don't want to risk it. So in terms of how this inline 4 acts on the road, it's got a lot of power. I mean, 115-ish horsepower in any motorcycle, that's enough to get you moving. This does have the MT-09 eked out on torque, and sometimes the numbers don't exactly tell 100% of the story. Yes, this is a very torquey bike, but both this and the MT-09, while their numbers are pretty close to each other, they ride very differently. So this engine, very, very smooth. Not a lot of vibrations, really comfortable to be on for a long period of time. Hell of a lot of fun too. But much more linear torque and a much more linear power curve on this bike than the MT-09. And when this light turns green, I'll talk a little more about that. I do love the sound this inline 4 makes. It would sound really good with a pipe on it. Something about the sound of an inline 4 on a motorcycle just reminds me of being at the racetrack, and I love that. Alright, so what I want to do here, I'm at about 4,000 RPM, 4,500 RPM, second gear. I'm going to roll on throttle here. Power on this bike, very, very linear. There's no point in the power band if you keep the throttle steady where you feel the bike kind of ramp up and take off. So it's a bike that's really, really predictable, and you just kind of know what it's going to do at all times. It's really easy to ride, and this would really make a great canyon ripper. I think between this and the MT-09, this is probably the better bike to go take out into the canyons for a couple of reasons. One, because of that linear power curve, but also the riding position. I keep saying it, but my feet are nice and up high, which means if you really want to throw an elbow out and kind of lean into a turn and make this more of a, or make it feel like more of a fully fared sport bike, you can do that a lot easier on this. The riding position is just a touch more aggressive than the MT-09, so that's really going to help you out for spirited riding. Now, in terms of how the bike feels and handles and everything, I think it handles a little better than the MT-09 actually. That's always one of the biggest complaints with the first and second generation MT-09 is it doesn't ever feel like it's super planted to the ground, especially the front end. And they totally fixed that with the new MT-09, so if you want to hear my thoughts on that, like I said, go check out my 2021 MT-09 review. But I think this just kind of soaks up the bumps in the road and corners better than my MT-09. Feels like that front wheel is really stuck to the pavement. Whereas on my bike, you know, sometimes you go around a corner and you wonder whether or not you have enough grip in the front and enough force or enough weight on that front end, but I don't ever get the feeling on this bike. So again, they fixed that on the new MT-09, but as far as how this one compares to mine, this definitely feels like it's a little better planted to the road, or a lot better planted to the road actually. I do love how much induction noise you get out of this. A lot of noise coming from the front end of this bike. It sounds really cool. Yeah, stuff like that where you're taking a turn and there's bumps mid-turn. This feels a lot better than the MT-09. And that just all comes down to steering geometry and the rake of the forks and how the bike is set up. Overall though, really smooth, really linear power curve. I really like this engine. It's got plenty of power and it's definitely a lot of fun. If you want to see more riding footage on some mountain roads in the summer in LA, go check out the full review I did of this bike. But now we're gonna do what I've been wanting to do for a long time, which is to pull the key out of the Z900 and put it in my MT-09 back to back without taking a helmet off and really seeing what the difference is. So we've got the impressions down on the Z. Now let's take out the MT. Oh, yeah, the seating position way better on the Z900. I really like that. I knew it was more aggressive on the Z, but it's not till you get off of one and step on the other back to back. It's really different. My feet feel like they're gonna touch the road now. I really love how high up the pegs come on that Z900. Really makes it feel more like a sport bike and less like a couch with a 847cc motor stuffed inside of it. Didn't have a whole lot of room on that one, but I can tell you both bikes have a crap ton of power. They'll both power wheelie, and they both have a ton of torque. Also, it's not just the foot position that's different. The bars are also more swept back on this MT-09. So on the Z, I'd probably be reaching out closer to here. I'd have much more of an angle in my back. This really feels like it was built for comfort and not for aggressive riding. Yeah, so like going around turns, even at really low speeds on the MT, just doesn't feel planted in the front end. A little more bouncy and yeah, it just doesn't feel like the right amount of weight is sitting on top of that front wheel. Not enough force going into that front wheel and through the front forks to really keep the front end planted. Also, what's a lot different between these two bikes is how the power is delivered. So I talked about how smooth and predictable the Z900 was. This is the complete opposite. You twist the throttle, it has an immediate crack to it instead of kind of ramping into it like the Z900 does. It just kicks you in the butt and you start going. And the Z900 kind of ramps into it. Also, you don't feel like you have good power all the way through this bike. It almost feels like there's two sweet spots. You have really good torque down low, like 2,000-3,000 RPM, and then it almost feels like up around 8,000, there's another sweet spot. So a little bit of a dip in the power curve. And I do think you get access to more low-end usable power at a lower RPM on this bike. Whereas the Z900, you kind of have to build through it and use the entire gear. This, you know, I can be in third gear when I'm supposed to be in second or even first and kind of lug through turns, lug through corners, and there's no issue with it at all. And it's not just accelerating that this bike can feel harsh. You roll off throttle and same thing, you get a little kick forward and there's a lot of engine braking through this motor. So you let off throttle, it kind of kicks you, the whole bike lunges forward and you start to slow down really quickly. The The Z900, you let off throttle and it just kind of coasts. You still get a good amount of engine braking, but it's nowhere near as strong as the MT-09. And that could go either way. Some people are going to like that, some people aren't going to like that at all. Me personally, I don't think I have an opinion either way. It's one of those things you just kind of get used to and learn how to ride the bike you end up buying. So on this, I'd use, you know, come off the brakes probably a little bit later, stay in the gear I'm in and come down to a stop. Whereas the Z900, you know, maybe I downshift before I come off the brakes, let the RPMs kick up a little bit, and then come down to a stop and really take advantage of the engine a little more while I'm engine braking. So definitely a little more engine braking out of this than the inline 4 in the Z900. Also, I say this in a lot of the Yamaha videos I make, but come on Yamaha, that fuel gauge is so stupid. You've got 2 bars on the right side, 3 bars on the left side. They're all different sizes. You never know how much fuel you have, so it looks like I have 4 out of 5 bars right now. That's probably right around half a tank. So the fuel gauge makes no sense. So yeah, this MT-09, a lot more snappy and definitely less linear than the Z900. What's that good for? I mean, this bike is a total blast to ride around city streets like this where you're going light to light and you really just, you know, kind of want to romp the bike around in short light to light distances like I'm doing here. The Z900 with the linear power curve, probably better for the racetrack, probably better for taking it up into the mountains over there and doing some spirited canyon rides. And again, with that seating position, especially the better bike for that. So that's what I'd say is, if you want a bike to kind of hoon around town on, maybe do some stunting, and you know, race light to light around the city, the MT-09 is a perfect bike, and that's why I like it as a commuter bike, because come around a turn and you can just romp on it. And then yeah, the Z900, more predictable, better for when you're really riding and, you know, taking corners with a lot of speed. Not to say that this can't keep up in the mountains, I've done it plenty, and not to say that the Z900 can't hoon around town. I just think one is a little better purpose-built for the other task than the other bike. And really, my biggest takeaway from making this whole video, my biggest surprise, is the seating position. I knew it was different, but I didn't realize it was this different. And after making this video, I'm almost at the point where I'm thinking about putting some rear sets on this bike to raise my foot position up, because I think that would help a lot with how this bike corners and how I feel on it, especially if I cant these bars forward a little bit.
Now, this is not going to be a fair test at all because I have an aftermarket pipe on my bike, but we're all gearheads here. We can't talk about these bikes without doing a little sound test. So we're going to hear both these bikes fire up, give them a little rev, but just keep in mind while you're listening to this, this has an aftermarket, a Krapovich exhaust that costs right around $1,000, and this bike has a bone stock exhaust. So yeah, not exactly a fair test, but let me know down in the comments what you think of these two bikes, how they sound. I'm sure the Z900 with a pipe on it would sound pretty good, but if you've watched any of my past MT-09 content, you know that the sound this bike makes is one of the main reasons I bought it. So you can probably guess which one I think sounds better.
All right, well, we went through riding position, we went through the riding characteristics of these bikes. I said there was one more main difference between these two bikes, and that is the tech package. Looking at this Z900, it's got a really, really nice looking TFT full color screen. That's really nice to look at. Everything's nice and big where you want it to be. Gear position indicator, your speedometer, you have a tach that goes across the screen in a really functional way, and a fuel gauge that actually makes sense with 6 bars that are all evenly spaced out. You have some other information here. You can go trip A, trip B, odometer, you know, and just switch some of the parameters down here. And then you also have a few different riding modes here. So we have road, we have sport, and there's also a rain mode. There you go, rain mode right there. So a couple different riding modes, and I do like how Kawasaki names their riding modes, because if you own more than one motorcycle, sometimes that stuff can get pretty confusing, and with all them being named, it's really easy to go through. But yeah, there's the tech package on the Z900. Let's go look at the MT-09. All right, so let's power up the MT-09 display, and this is a much more old school, sort of analog looking LCD display. Much smaller, and yeah, it just doesn't look nearly as good. You do have pretty much all the same information. So you have your tach that goes all the way across the top, still have a gear position indicator, speedometer, and then some other parameters you can change, just like the Kawasaki. We also have riding modes, which are adjusted right here. You can see them on the screen there. So you have B, which is kind of like your rain mode. Standard would be your road mode. And then you have A, which is the fastest, or sport mode. And living with the bike, you know, that makes perfect sense. But then you get on another bike from a different manufacturer where they're numbered or named differently. I just don't like how Yamaha does A, B, and C modes, or A standard, and I don't even remember what it is. A, B, and standard. That doesn't make any sense. I can't even remember it. So yeah, I wish they would name the modes. Then you also, I didn't show you this on the Kawasaki, but just like the Kawasaki, you have adjustable traction control as well. Now, this is the older MT-09. When you look at these two bikes, so if you're shopping for a used MT-09 and a used Z900 from a few years ago, the tech package on the Z900, I think, takes the cake just because of the screen. But when you look at this, or not this, but the new MT-09 compared to what is still the new Z900, or the same generation Z900, the Z900 looks a lot less impressive. The screen is still a little bigger on the Z900 than the new MT-09, but the new MT-09 has a 6-axis IMU. It's got, you know, adjustable slide control and brake torque control and wheelie control, traction control, cornering ABS, whereas this bike over here just has your traction control modes, your power modes, and ABS in a straight line. It's not adjustable. So way more advanced on the new MT-09, but unfortunately we don't have one of those here with us. But as you can see from the B-roll we sprinkled in on top of this video, we have ridden it before, and it's a pretty impressive tech package. Kawasaki needs to step up their game on a new Z900 with some new tech if they want to remain competitive. All right, so I mentioned 3 differences and we went through all of them. Seating position, how the bike actually rides on the road and how the power is delivered, and the tech package. But there's one more kind of big difference between these bikes, or at least a big difference when you look at these bikes on paper, and that is weight. 425 pounds on the MT-09, fully ready to go with fuel. And then 470 pounds on the Z900, which sounds like a pretty big difference. Then you go digging through the spec sheet and you see that this bike right here holds 4.5 gallons of fuel versus 3.7 gallons of fuel in the MT-09, which is only a difference of under 5 pounds when you consider how much gasoline weighs. So the fuel tank size isn't the reason the Z900 is a lot heavier. The good news is when you actually get moving, throw a leg over both of these bikes and get out on the road, you don't really feel or notice the weight. So if the added weight of the Z900 scares you, I would say forget about it. Just go ride one and see for yourself, because me personally, I don't love heavy motorcycles, but I really don't feel too much of a difference between these bikes. So there you go. There's all the differences between an MT-09 and a Z900. Obviously, one of my favorite categories of motorcycle, considering I bought one. I want to know what your thoughts are down in the comments below, because funny enough, the Z900 is one of the most searched for bikes on TFL Bikes. So you guys clearly are interested in this bike, and I want to hear your opinions on it down in the comments below. You guys know which one I bought. It's the MT-09. That's my personal bike. So yeah, if it were me deciding between these two bikes, I'd go with the Yamaha. I like that snappy power delivery, and especially the new one with the tech package. Really like all the tech they threw at it, but the riding position on the Z900, it's sporty, it's aggressive, it's killer. I love it. Can't go wrong with either bike. I didn't mention pricing. This was a $9,000 bike when it was brand new. This is a $9,400 bike, and then the new MT-09 is a $9,800 bike. So about a $400 difference between them. And then also there's a premium version of both of these bikes. There's an SE model of this one, which is $10,900, gets you better Öhlins suspension, steel braided brake lines. And then there's an SP version of the MT-09, which is kind of on a different level. It's $17,200, comes with Öhlins semi-active suspension, also steel braided brake lines. So you kind of get nice Öhlins suspension in the premium version of this, and very nice semi-active suspension for a lot more money in the premium version of that. So there you go. There's a deep dive on everything you need to know MT-09 and Z900. Clearly I'm excited about this because I love sport bikes. We'll catch you in the next video.